Hey, this is Mike of Black Cat Amplification, and I have got an awesome, cool radio guitar amp build here for you. So this is a quick little demo to kind of show you what this is and what it does. And if you're interested in buying it, or if you have any questions, please let me know wherever this is listed. If you still see it for sale and you've got questions, please write me. So this is a Bassman amp, okay? It's a very unique one in that it's a very, very low watt model Bassman amp. They call it a Bassman Micro, okay? And it was kind of invented, I guess, by Rob Robinette. I don't know if you've ever been to his website, but if you go to robrobinette.com, he's got lots of great info on amps and different Fender amps, Marshall amps, all kinds of different things, and showing you how to mod different things and all that kind of stuff. And on his website, he has a lot of different plans for different versions of micro Bassmans, right? And I thought, I've really got to build one of these because I think low watt amps are becoming so popular. One, people can crank them up at home and it's not going to shake the house down. Two, you can record really well with them. They sound awesome recorded. They sound huge a lot of times. These smaller watt amps can sound huge with the right microphones and recording equipment. And you don't have to blow out everybody, right? And you can crank these amps up and get that grit and gain that you really like without actually having the amp be super, super loud. So this is a old Silvertone radio cabinet from around the 1940s era. And this was in just the most immaculate shape. I collect a lot of radio cabinets. I use them in a lot of amp builds, but this one just was really special because it practically looked almost brand new. I had to clean it up a little bit and do some polishing work and stuff, but it just looks like almost like the day it came out of the store, that somebody bought it in the 40s. So I was able to reuse a lot of the existing radio controls, and I had to add a couple extras because there's a lot of controls on this thing. I mean, this is a full-on Bassman amp, just lower wattage. And I've got a printout from Rob Robinette's website here just to kind of show what this amp is. So I've actually built this custom turret board with all the controls and everything, very similar to this. And my layout may be slightly different, just in a tiny bit, just because of the size requirements of this cabinet and things. But I built a custom chassis. It's all hand-wired, turret board configuration. And it has a pretty good plethora of tubes here. So all the way up to the power section, it's identical to the 5F6A Bassman amp, which was really like the first Bassman that that Fender ever kind of came out with, that Marshall decided to clone for their Marshall JTM45. So in a sense, this is like having two amps in one. It's a Bassman amp, but if you change one tube in it, it becomes a micro Marshall JTM45. And that tube is the V1 tube, the first position tube, which Fender put in as a 12AY7, which is a very low gain tube. If you put a 12AX7 in this position, it boosts the gain a lot in the first stage, and that's essentially a Marshall JTM45. So it's kind of like having two amps in one in that sense, because Marshall cloned this Bassman model to make their JTM45, and they beefed up the gain a little bit by changing the tube configuration here. So this amp, you can swap those out and essentially make yourself a Marshall JTM45. So the second tube is a 12AX7, and the third one is also a 12AX7. You have a Easy 81 rectifier tube, or a 6CA4. They kind of go hand in hand, two values for the same tube. And the power tube is really what makes this a micro Bassman. They call it micro. This is not a micro amp by any means. It's a pretty large size radio cabinet, right? Medium to large. It's just that it's micro in the sense of wattage. So this is a 12AU7 power tube. And it's great because it's kind of like, you can get into that 1 to 3 watt range, 1 watt being the 12AU7 by itself, or you can swap it out with a 12BH7, which will give you a little bit more wattage, like probably up to like 3 watts or so. So lots of cool tube configurations you can do with this. And the way I have the chassis labeled, it tells you right on the chassis next to each tube slot which tubes you can change out for other value tubes. You don't have to have the amp rebiased or anything like that. It will handle all those tube configurations just perfectly. So, and I've tested it with different things, and you could really do a lot with this thing. All right, for the controls, I'm going to start on this side, okay? This has got a lot of different controls on it, and I'll show you what they do. It makes this very versatile. This first one here is your channel volume. So that's basically like saying the high input channel on the Fender Bassman. That's your channel volume, right? Then you have a preamp volume, which is a separate volume, so it's going to give you a little bit more flexibility in that section, right, in the preamp section. So you got your channel volume, your input volume, let's say, preamp volume, and then this is where your tone stack comes in, these three. You have your treble, your mid, sorry, this is the bass, and you got your mids here, scooped it. Presence knob, right? So let's put the presence all the way down. All the way up. And then here is your master volume. So this is really what's driving that output tube, that 12AU7, or if you change it to a 12BH7. So that's where your master volume comes in. So you can turn this thing all the way up, and at 1 watt, 1 to 3 watts, it's not going to blow the house down. It's pretty loud. I mean, it definitely is loud enough for a room. If you had people talking in a room, it's going to be, you know, pretty loud to talk, for them to talk over, but it's not going to be like super, you know, band practice stage type volumes. Let's push the gain on this thing a little bit. Currently, it has an internal speaker. Really should only be used really in a practice setting because it's a really small speaker. But I've got it plugged into a 412 cabinet. I highly recommend if you buy this, if you don't have, you know, at least a 112 speaker cabinet to plug it into. I mean, it's a great little practice amp, but you're going to get so much more out of it if you can have a bigger speaker to really push those lows, the mids, the highs, everything. It's just going to sound so much better if you have a larger cabinet. Alright, let's get that gain that we all like from Fender. So let's put the input volume way up. We call it the channel volume. And then the preamp volume. Turn my reverb pedal off. I had a reverb pedal on, but that's the only pedal I had on, just to kind of give it some larger room sound, but with it off. Up, treble up, give it a little more bass. I find that with the bass on this, you really don't need much bass at all before it starts to get almost too bassy. I mean, again, it's a Bassman, right? So it's got a lot of bass in this amp. Bassmans were originally designed to be bass amps, right? So for guitar, you may need to cut back on the lows a little bit if it's starting to get a little too flubby for you, depending on how much you have the amp pushed, right? So with the bass all the way up. Sounds pretty good even with the bass way up through a 412 cabinet, but once you start to get smaller speakers, it's going to be way too much bass for a lot of the smaller speakers to handle. And again, this has a little practice speaker in there, but it's really meant to be like a head, so you're going to use this hopefully with a larger speaker cabinet and get so much more out of it. If you use the small speaker, you're definitely going to have to cut way back on the bass because it's probably just going to be too much for that speaker. Back on the mids, a little bit back on the treble. Turn them all up. Every knob up. Let's see what it can do. So it sounds really awesome. I mean, it's a Bassman, just low watt Bassman. So let's try it with some pedals. I am going to just kick back a little bit on a couple different things. Let's see, kick back on the treble, the bass a little. Mids don't have to be all the way up. It's just a nice, smooth little breakup sound, right? So I'm going to play through a Klon type boost pedal to see what, if pushing a boost through this thing, what kind of gain territories we can get into. Now, this boost pedal is not, the gain isn't up all the way. It's very light, right? It's just a little extra boost. Almost like putting another tube in, right? And having an extra gain stage. And then you can really get into that sort of classic rock territory, maybe like hair metal-ish sort of territory. So it takes pedals really well. Turn the gain up just a little bit on the boost. And with it off. More gain. Alright, let me show you the back of the amp and we'll plug in the internal speaker. Again, I really don't recommend the internal speaker for playing all the time. This thing really shines when you plug it through something larger. However, it does have an internal speaker just because, you know, sometimes you just want to do a little practicing, right? So it has two output speaker jacks. Here's your power in, your IEC jack. Here is a 1 amp fuse. I'm going to include extra fuses with this. Anybody that buys my amps, I always include extra fuse in case you're caught in a situation where you're playing somewhere or you're recording a session or something and fuse blows because you got a bad power strip or you got a bad, you know, surge or something like that and you need fuses on hand. So I always like to put extra fuses, and I usually put them somewhere where you can reach them very easily inside the amp. So 1 amp fuse, it's got your speakers. And the other thing this has is an effects loop. So it's designed with an effects loop and it works really well. So if you wanted to put something in an effects loop, you have a send and return right here. And it's just great. I mean, it's just an extra accessory that works really well with the amp. There's a 4 ohm and an 8 ohm impedance switch. The transformer that I had to get with this 12AU7 power output tube really didn't have options for 16 ohm that I could find for the right power ratings that I needed for the output transformer. So really just the 8 ohm or 4 ohm outputs. Now that doesn't mean that you know, you can't plug in 2 cabinets, because if you had, say, 2 16 ohm cabinets, you could take this internal speaker out and plug in 2 16 ohm cabinets and set it on 8 ohm, because that's a total of an 8 ohm load, right? Or if you had 2 8 ohm cabinets, switch it to 4 ohms, right? So currently, I believe the speaker that's in here is a 4 ohm speaker. So let's turn this back around. Very nice little handle I put on here. And there's blue LEDs inside that illuminate the inside. You can see all the tubes in there. Again, it's really cool. I mean, it's a very small speaker. But with it pushed all the way up, which it's almost all the way up here, you know, it's going to get just a little sort of too much for that speaker. Cut the treble and the presence back a little. Got the mids back a little. Again, the bass is way down because I think it starts to get a little too much for this speaker. Just a little. I mean, I think it sounds a little better. It still has a lot of bass, even at low settings. this is your master volume again. These are your preamp volume and your input volume. I'm going to put those at noon. Change my pickups here. Treble and presence. Different sounds depending on where you set these, you know. You can get a little bit of breakup here with this all the way up, and then diamond your preamp volume. Or cut the input back and put the preamp up. So you get different kind of tone options that way. Notice how I've had the master volume almost all the way up. Again, it's just a 1-watt amp right now, the way it's configured. So you can put it all the way up in a room and practice with it, and it's, you know, it's pretty nice because it's just like you're barely cranking a larger amp up to 1, you know, it's about like that. So the internal speaker sounds pretty good. I mean, I think it sounds great at cleans. Let's clean it up a little bit. Decent pushed, right? If you really want to crank the amp and play some rock and get some gain out of it, try it through a larger speaker if you buy this thing, because it'll really sound awesome, and it won't, you know, blow the neighbors out. It's a really nice little low wattage amp, and again, it's a clone. It's literally built exactly like the original Bassman, all down to the part. The only difference is, you know, it's low watt. It doesn't have that large power output section. So you can use it for recording, for practicing, or just low setting, jamming, you know, that kind of stuff. But it's really cool, and it's in this awesome little cabinet. So if you have any questions, please write me wherever you see this listed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions for you. But let me know, and thanks for watching the video.